Hello everyone, I'm Alfian and today we are going to solve the LeetCode challenge on the medium difficulty on the MySQL database query challenge, and it is on the challenge number 180 called the consecutive numbers. And for this particular challenge we have the table of logs which has two columns. The first one, which is the ID and nums column, as usual. ID is the primary key and the num is the varchar. And we are working with MySQL language. If you want to use something else other than MySQL, then go ahead. I encourage you to do so. And what we have to do is find all numbers that appear at least 3 times consecutively and return the result table in any order. And the result format is in the following example. And for this example 1 right here, we have the ID and column. We have 3 consecutive numbers with our naked eye, which is 1, 1, and then 1, 3 same consecutive numbers, and then 2 is not being considered consecutive numbers because 1, 1, and then 2. Also 1, 2, and then 1, and the same thing goes like 1, 2, 1, and then 2. And for this 2, 1, 2, 2 is not a 3 consecutive numbers because there is 1 in between them. So the only thing that has the consecutive numbers is the number 1 right here. How do we solve this out? And we have the output right here, which is consecutive nums, that which number that has the consecutive numbers, which is only 1. 1 is not the occurrence but the number from the number column right here, which is number 1, not how many consecutive numbers that occur inside the logs table. And the explanation clearly says that 1 is the only number that appears consecutively for at least 3 times. And without further ado, let's solve this out. And the first thing that we should do is by selecting everything. Select everything from the table of, you guess it, using logs table. And we can run this to see the content of the logs table. And we have the wrong answer, the output right here, but we got the gist about what we are trying to work here. And for this consecutive number, how do we find between one another? Is by ID 1 and then ID 2 is 1, ID 3 is 1. Since consecutive numbers is placed adjacent to other numbers which is a similar or the same number between one another, which occurs 3 times, so we can get around this by adding a join keyword, and we can realign our query from the first ID to the second ID and check it against the third ID using one row. Let me explain this to you by putting a visualization of this log table. Let me copy this part and we go to solid row drawing. And we have the first table right here, which is logs table, and then we need to align the next one. How do we do this? By aligning the ID1, check if ID1 is equal to the ID2 and the number that is on the entry of within the ID3. And then as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use join keyword, and we can pass in our another table but slightly off by one number, which is in this case, since we have the consecutive ID incremental by ID1, ID2, ID3, 4, 5, 6, and then finally 7, we can utilize that ID as a reference point to the next number to see if 3 numbers are consecutive. So we are aligning this table, and then but we use the second ID and then using the on keyword, I believe, using on keyword and using that ID is equals to the previous table, logs table, which is the first table, and using the -1 to make this slightly offset from the between the second and first table. So this one is the first table, is noted by the L1, and the next one is the L2, which is logs 2, that is I'm putting an alias, and then finally L3. What about L3 is by it is going to be used as the next alignment to see if 3 numbers are particularly aligned between one and another. How do we determine if they are consecutive numbers is by checking against the adjacent IDs after the next entries horizontally by each row. So if we look over here, we are basically comparing them if they are the same in consecutive numbers. So between ID1 and then ID2, which is the next ID, which is the adjacent number of the ID, adjacent entry after the first table, and then the adjacent entry, and then ID plus 1, and finally from the second table plus 1, which is ID3. Since we have number 1, number 1, and number 1, then we will return this as our answer. Then how do we implement this out? We can go back to our implementation and we can implement this between the select and from. Oops, what I mean is after the from keyword, we can use the join statement, join keyword, then join the next table using logs. Copy, we make the cell copy, then logs as L2. Whoops, I forgot to put the first one, logs as L1 as stated before, logs as S2, and then using the on query on L1.id, since we are referencing the L1 of the ID using the first table AD, and then checking and align slightly offset within the L2 with the ID, but using the subtracted by 1 or negative 1. And we can test this out using the join logs as L2, and we have the slightly offset ID to check for the adjacent consecutive numbers between the table 1 and table 2, which is we are aligning this ID2, and then since ID2 subtracted by 1 is equals to the ID1, so we are using these IDs as reference within this own statement right here. We can do the same thing on the third table using, you guess it, join logs. We make a shallow copy of our logs table as L3 using the on keyword, and we reference the ID from the third table using the second table and slightly offset just like we did on the first table with the second table using L2.id is equals to the L3.id but subtracted by 1. And then let's run this again to see the result, and we are already aligned ID1 with the ID2 and ID3, which has the same values between them, which is number 1 right here. And since the next entry we have 1 1 2, then it's not considered consecutive, and the next one 1 2 1 is not considered consecutive, 2 1 2, and then finally 1 2 2. And as you can see, we already got the next procedure that we already wanted from the table visualization on the escalator drawing. And then how do we really make sure that every num from each entry has the same nums, and then we return only that num as the answer of the consecutive nums column. Let me visualize this using the accelerator whiteboard. And this one from the first table, which is L1, we need to compare using the where clause against the L2 with the same entry, which is ID2 right here, and then compare them again using the AND clause, using this AND clause to check between three numbers if they are the same numbers or not. Using the L1 against the L2, we cannot use directly like L1 with L2 and then equals L3 like that. So since it is an operand type between left and right only, then we can compare the L1 to check if the L1 with the L2 is the same, and then using the AND clause and check if L2 and L3 is the same. In this case, we are comparing both num1, num2, and finally num3. And change this using the where clause. And how do we implement this? It is a bit difficult to implement this if you still don't know the fundamental about the where and AND clause. And I'm not gonna lie that I'm still learning about MySQL as I'm making this video. let's go back to our code, our implementation, and we can use the where clause. But before that, you might already notice that from the join statement right here, both statements from the join, and we are creating L2 and L3 as the table, and we stop on the ID 5 from the first table. Why? Because the join statement is only joining and displaying the one that has 3 tables in each entry. So if it has a null, since we have ID on the ID 6 right here, we have the nums of 2, and the L2 we have the ID 7, and but on the L3 we don't have any ID. So it is, since L3 is null, then the join will not return that row on the ID 6, and also the same thing also applies on the ID 7 from the L1 right here. So we only returning up to the point to the ID 5. And how about ID 1? Since ID 1 is returning, it's because ID 1 already covered with the ID 2 from the L2 and also from the L3, which is on the ID 3 right here. It is already aligned, and but all of the 3 tables are not null in each entry, in each row, as highlighted by the right square right here. Okay, so that is the main difference between the join and left join. If we have the left join, then what we are getting is the null number, and the ID 6 and 7 will be added to the left join, since left join is the reference, and the next one should be null on the after the entry of the ID 7 right here. Then below that will be null, and below that again will be null. So that is why we are using the join, because we are trying to find the consecutive numbers between 3 numbers of the same table column. And the next one that we already mentioned earlier, we can use the where clause, where the L1.num is equals to the L2.num. What are we trying to do here? Because L1 has the num column, and also L2 has the num column, and we can check between the num entry, check from the L1 and the L2 right here has the same num. Also, we need to check if the L2 has the same num value as the L3. Okay. How do we achieve this? Is by using the AND clause, like I mentioned earlier. L2.num is equals to the L3.num, and let's run this again to see if it really works. And we are only returning the one that has the same nums that chain with the AND statement or AND keyword using the where and then AND. So it is basically returning only the one that has the 3 consecutive values, 3 same consecutive values, since this one 112, 121, 212, 122, and they are not compatible, or they are not fulfilling the where and AND clause. So this one is the only column, not the column, but the entry that has the sufficient, or the one that fulfills all of the predicate of this where statement and AND from this piece of query. And we can eliminate the ID, and we only return the num. How do we do this? Is by selecting only that num from the L1. Don't forget to put that L1.num from logs as L1, because we already used the L1 as alias, and we can access the num column just like this one. And let's run this again to see if it works. And we still have the wrong answer, num, and the value is the consecutive nums. We can use the num as alias using alias consecutive nums, and we can run this again to see if it really works. And we have the accepted solution. Let's submit our code to see if it really works. And we have the wrong answer. Why is it happening? It's because we have 4 consecutive numbers, But in this case, we are returning both entries, even though it is already the same value as 3, but we only need to return one number of 3 because 3 is the only value that is returning that has 3 or more consecutive numbers, the same numbers from one to another in adjacent position. So we are basically returning this one from the ID 1, 2 and 3, and if you notice, this one from the 2, 3 and 4. So we are returning 2 entries as 1, like this. Is first 1, 2 and 3, and then 2, 3 and 4. Then it is considered 2 entries as consecutive nums. So we only returning only 1 nums. How do we do this? Is by using a distinct keyword. How do we implement the distinct keyword? It's fairly easy. Is by using after the select keyword we can pass in our distinct. So we only return the unique numbers of the unique result from the consecutive nums. Let's say if we have 2 occurrences of 3 right here, nums of 3, then we only return that one only. So that is hence the name distinct, only return the unique value. So we have packed the same numbers as one number and not the copy of that number. And let's submit this again to see if it really works. Okay, so that's about it. I hope you understand my explanation. If you still don't understand, you can ask me in the comment section. Or if you have any better solutions regarding this challenge, tell us what you think in the comment section. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.